Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone Podcast with KOMO Sports Director Niko Tamurian and Najee Moye.
Welcome to the KOMO Sports End Zone Podcast. I'm Niko Tamurian, joined as always by Najee Moye. Najee, I think the only thing missing from this introduction is the sad trumpet playing.
Oh, I'm sorry to anyone who had to listen to that. Yeah, it is a bit of a sad week. I mean, the Seahawks fans can officially check out of their team for the season officially. I mean, there's one game left, but I mean,
and I think it's meaningless playoff wise, but I think there's something to get to 10 wins.
I think there's something.
We'll talk about it.
There's something. I think. I mean, depending on what the Rams decide to do as far as going forward for their playoffs. But I think there's reason to watch the Rams game. Unfortunately, it's not for playoff hopes, Niko.
Yeah.
No, it's not for playoff hopes. No.
So,
but you'll watch because you have you had a little wager, not with me, but you pointed out.
Oh, that's right, with Taylor.
About the beginning of the year.
Didn't I say they would sweep the Rams though? I think I already dove Taylor.
Well, I was talking specifically about the win total.
Oh, I said 10, right?
You said 10. I
did say 10.
You did say 10.
And I would be, and that's the thing. As disappointing as it is to not have the playoffs on the table,
right?
And it's the first time since 21 that the final game of the season is meaningless, so to speak, in that regard, anyway.
Yeah.
10 wins is a good start.
It is a good start.
And that's kind of what I want to talk about here. Obviously, we love bringing everybody to the show because, we're at the games, we're in the locker room, we're able to talk to the players, get the vibe. And when things are at a high, when you're on a 4-game winning streak, it's one thing. And I think that as this week goes on, it'll be interesting to see the vibes at the Virginia Mason Athletic Center because that is the question. And that's the question we want all of you to answer in the comments that Najee and I are going to talk about at length in this episode because breaking down the Rams matchup just feels kind of futile at this point.
Right.
And so let's break down what really matters. How do you see this season?
Are we okay with this season? And it's interesting because I think if you are maybe a season ticket holder who went to a lot of the home games this year, you're a little upset.
Right. Sure.
Let's start with
the home schedule, and that's got to change.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the results.
The results. I feel like the Seahawks kind of. And, it's easy to say that's not the end of the season. I think they'll kind of rebirth itself as far as a home field advantage at the beginning of next year. But I think the home field advantage, the 12s, was kind of a little bit – I don't want to say the 12s were less. But the Hawks lost a lot of games at home this year. A lot of games that were winnable. I mean, I'm talking specifically about the Vikings game, about the Giants game. The Bills game was gone from the start.
That one doesn't sting, but the Giants game, that one, looking back, the Vikings late.
The Vikings game definitely. I think both those games are just –
the Rams you mentioned.
Yeah, the Rams games. I think that if you're a home ticket holder at Lumen Field, you're there you're just a little bit, you're just like, oh man, you're bummed. But if you look at the totality of the season, let's take some things into account. Yeah, first year head coach has never been a head coach before in the NFL. You have a defense that has been rebuilt schematically, because of the first year head coach. You have some kind of changes in offense. You have some guys that are coming into their own. Some guys are maybe kind of spent more time on the sidelines. You have Geno Smith as the ever, constant on that team. Good or bad, he was the quarterback. He's good.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about next week.
We'll talk about next week.
There's a lot of questions there.
Yeah. Before we get to that, though, overall, how do you feel about the season, how it went? I'm doing a lot of couching because I'm still thinking about it, honestly.
Yeah, well, let me give you my case, then we'll put the fans' case, and then I want to hear what you think.
Okay.
I think that you look at it objectively, okay? Missing the playoffs is never a good thing. Like, you never want to say, oh, it was a good season, we missed out on the playoffs.
Right.
But I do think that you, in all fairness, have to look at the larger picture. And you mentioned a moment ago, Mike Macdonald is a first-year coach. The offensive line was the most pieced together offensive line, signing guys off the street, undrafted rookies, late-round draft pick rookies.
Right.
Seeing action more than you should ever see in that position, in that regard. And ultimately, I think when you consider that, and you consider that you had a regime change, you went from, and it wasn't like, you fired a coach after 2 years. And we're talking about Pete Carroll was a legend.
A legendary coach, yeah.
And you mentioned Mike's first foray in this, Ryan Grubb's first foray in this, and I think Grubb's got some maybe things to prove here in the last week of the season. That'll be probably a February podcast discussion potentially. But
interesting.
I think given the circumstances, while it is never good that you miss the playoffs, I feel good and relatively being the operative word there, optimistic about what we'll see in 2025. Just simply from the standpoint, of this, that as the year went on, we saw Mike Macdonald become a better coach.
Right.
I think he's already a good coach, but we saw him identify problems and not mess around at all in fixing them. I mean, his starting linebackers in week 1, Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker, are no longer with the Seahawks.
Sure.
And right now, doing great things at linebacker are your 5th-round draft pick Tyrese Knight and Ernest Jones, who we have raved about on this show.
Yeah.
And to me, that screams that, okay, Mike is, learning on the job. I thought he was already pretty good, but he's learning on the job.
Mm-hmm.
He has the ability to diagnose things pretty quickly. And you might say, pretty quickly, it was November. Well, in NFL terms, to completely overhaul your linebacking core in November,
It takes a lot.
That is an incredible overall. And credit where it's due to John Schneider to be able to pull off the trade with the Titans to get Ernest in here, who's just been an absolute game changer. Now extend him. So the way he diagnosed things, the way things got better as the year went on, and we talked about this when they acquired Ernest. It almost mirrors when he was in Baltimore. They had kind of a slower start when he was their defensive coordinator. And then they get Roquan Smith, and it's like all bets are off. And that's kind of the different players, all that stuff. But it's kind of the similar dynamic that I love that Mike diagnosed it. I love that he got better as the year went on. And listen, 10 wins is a good year. 10 wins is going to usually get you in the playoffs. 10 wins is going to get some AFC teams in the playoffs.
If you had told me at the beginning of the year that the Niners would miss the playoffs, I would think, well, the Seahawks.
Like 6-11.
Well, yeah, and if you told me the Niners would miss the playoffs, like, oh, the Seahawks will win 12 games this year.
Yeah.
That's not what happened.
And that's just what it is. And
Right.
so I think given all that, this was a good first step. And that's actually a question we presented to folks on social media. Oh, I put it in the let me just put this in a different area. I actually made it our background there for a second there. Here we go.
This question is larger than all of us.
His question is larger than all of us, actually. So here we go. I'm going to bring this up now. So the question we presented to fans was, how do you feel? The playoffs are off the table. How do you feel about the Seahawks 2024 season? Nice first step in new era, which is what I'm calling this.
Okay.
42%, 41.9. Failure by not making the playoffs about 35%, 34.9.
Okay.
And then a chance at 10 wins equals a good year. Of course, they have to get the Rams to get 10 wins. We're talking about it's like a foregone conclusion, but the Rams may be resting people.
Sure.
23% on that. It's actually, as far as our polls go,
It's relatively split.
it's a pretty good split. And so that to me is indicative because let's be honest here, social media, especially X these days, can be kind of a cesspool when it comes to that, like negativity.
Kind of. I'm
Not
kidding.
being nice. So the fact that and that's where that poll, of course, was. So the fact that you have people saying, hey, you know what? That's a nice first step. I think is indicative. Now, listen, if you're talking Pete Carroll's still in charge and you've just missed the playoffs.
This is a problem. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in back-to-back years, and they hadn't missed the playoffs in back-to-back years since 08, 09 before Pete. So it would have been the first time under Pete. So if you're talking about in that perspective, it's more indicative of a decline. But because you wipe the slate clean and you have Mike starting at 9-8, hopefully 10-7, I think that's a bigger launch point because now, again, and I'll wrap my point up with this, Naj, that we've seen Mike diagnose this thing. Now he has a whole entire offseason.
Right.
You got to remember, he was hired at the end of January.
Exactly.
He didn't even go to the combine because he's trying to put a staff together.
Right.
Right. Like these things easily get brushed aside, but they're hugely important. And now he is there for every step of the way this offseason. He knows every one of his players inside and out. So even when it comes to free agency in March, he has a much better idea that he can, it's John Schneider's call, but Mike can be like, hey, we need to do something here, or wherever.
Here's the thing. To call this year a failure is laughable. You're not
Cheers
drafting
with my diet soda.
You're not drafting in the top 10 in the NFL draft. You have a quarterback. You don't have. You're not falling apart. You don't have infighting like the Jets have. Or alleged infighting. Who knows? A first-year head coach, and you had the chance. You're winning 9 games at least.
At least.
And given how at times bad the Seahawks have looked, they have looked equally as good. Now, what I am excited for in the future is that if this team could clean up on their own mistakes.
Well, I mean, if they clean those up, they're in the playoffs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're thinking maybe 2 or 3 games can just like flip like that,
Yeah.
I think this is a great first step. I think any team with a first-year head coach winning 9 games, missing the playoffs, a lot of that has to do with the division, honestly.
Well, sure. And let me ask you this, Najee, to continue. Yeah. I mean, to continue the point here, those close losses, whether it's the Giants, cause or
that
whether
was a
it's
freak.
like
That was a freak accident.
Yeah, sure. Like
Right.
with these games that you lost because of red zone interceptions
Right.
or crazy miscues,
I
do
think
you look at that as like, okay, that's a one-off, first year coaching staff, blah, 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 or do you look at that and say, hey, that's a major issue that's got to be fixed
I
here?
think. I mean, when you,
maybe a little
if
bit
you
both.
look at specifically penalties,
Yeah,
that
that's
is
the thing.
I mean, if they were awful in penalties, they were decent at penalties. I mean, like it's something that you can definitely fix. It'll take time, you know. Also, I'm just thinking about interceptions now. Not just this is not a Geno Smith thing. This is interceptions should be on everyone. Some of them obviously were not on everyone, you know. And at the same time, you have maybe one of the best running backs in the league playing about half the year, you know.
Right. Well, yeah.
I'm enthusiastic thinking about this team next year because they can only get better.
Sure.
They can only get better. It's just hard to like. I mean, we were in the booth together watching the Buffalo game. We're like, oh, this is not good.
No,
This is
no,
not
you knew.
good. I'm just
You
like,
knew.
this is
Kinda
not good. You know, especially after the press conference, you just kind of knew we're just kind of sitting there waiting for someone to show up and talk to us, talk to the media, and we were waiting for quite a while.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's something that, you know.
but not every game is going to be like that. Not every game was like that. I mean,
No,
a couple
you
of high
can tell
points.
these losses hit these guys a little harder.
Exactly.
in the
Yeah,
past.
because they expect better of
that's
themselves,
not
and
a-
that's good. And that's good that they expect better of themselves. That being said, going down the stretch of the year, back-to-back games against the Packers and Vikings is brutal.
Yeah.
It was absolutely brutal.
And you can
you know,
lament how you lost those games. I mean, the Packers kind of took that, control that. The Vikings, I still think about thinking like, oh gosh, you should have won that.
and that was a very winnable game.
And Minnesota's 14-win team. So it's like,
Exactly. Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
And
Like,
and the Vikings rolled over the Packers a couple like last week. So I definitely don't think the year was a failure. It's a great first step, but I think there's some main things that need to be cleaned up: penalties and interceptions. I think if you clean up penalties and interceptions, you're probably winning like 14 games this year. That's actually crazy to say. Maybe not 14. We're gonna scale it back to maybe 12.
yeah, no question about it.
Especially on a year where the Niners had a down year, of course. The biggest
well, that's
competition.
something you're not gonna be able to count on every year.
Right. No, and then the Rams will obviously be probably be better next year. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think that ultimately, when you look at the story of the 2024 Seahawks, I think. First of all, you have to wait a few years.
Right.
And normally you'd say, well, that's silly. But I think in this case, given that it is the first year of all this new stuff, I think you have to look and see how it plays out and how it looks down the road. Was this really a first step?
What
it
grade?
feels like it right now.
Let's put teacher Niko, and I'll
I
go
used
first.
to be an adjunct professor.
Really, adjunct professor Niko. I would give the Seahawks season a C+. Here's why. They pass because they're probably exactly middle of the pack in the NFL. But they need to take the next step to beat the Packers of the world. Beating the Bills of the world is a couple extra steps. But beating the Packers of the world, beating the Vikings of the world, beating the Rams in both games would be great, you know? At the beginning of the year, we kind of saw, you know, it's weird. I think about the beginning of the year, and I think about how the Broncos game went, and how the Patriots game went, and how the Dolphins game went.
Oh, we were going wild.
Exactly. But then you look at where these teams are now, and it's really awfully almost confusing, you know?
Sure.
Because the Broncos are a playoff team with their rookie quarterback. That was his first ever game. Bo Nix coming back to Seattle, place he hates. The Patriots are going to be number one pick overall again, and the Dolphins are fighting for a playoff spot. Where does that put the Seahawks, who went 3-0 in their first year? I don't know.
Sure. Well, if anything, it was like a little bit of a streaky team, right? 3 in a row, then 4 in a row into November into December. I think that when you look at things, here's my thing. First of all, I don't know if it still exists. I haven't taught since 2021. But I think that there was a site. It was called Rate My Professor.
Oh, yes.
And I was like the easiest of easiest professors. I taught sportscasting and I taught broadcast writing and professional writing, which was like resume and emails, professional stuff like that. And I had like the easiest of the easy grades.
Right.
I tell you that from the preface. I think C+ is very fair. But I'm an easy grader. I'd say B-.
Oh,
not a B.
This is consistent with
It's
the
like
entire
the Niko curve.
This is consistent with the entire podcast that we've done all year, because I'm just like, oh.
Does that make sense? Like,
there's a curve.
I was that one that like, if a kid like really like flunked out in my class or something, like I would try to give them chances, and I'd give them an incomplete. I'm like, do the work, and then of course they wouldn't, so I'd have to give them the F after. But,
right.
You know, I would always try.
I would curve the grade if like Geno Smith was hurt for the rest of half the year or something like that.
I'm giving my only.
But given how the offensive line has played,
if that's what's frustrating about it. Let's be honest. Like, okay, so we've been largely, so to speak, positive about the season as far as a season that doesn't end with a playoff bid, about as positive as it can be.
You've been positive. I've been enthusiastic.
There you go. I like that. But what's maddening at times is that you look at some of the aspects of this team, the offensive line for starters.
Right.
And if you just invested a little bit, you might be in a much better position. The fact that in the first half of the season, Geno Smith led the NFL in passing yards with arguably the worst NFL offensive line in front of him. And granted, Charles Cross was really good all year.
Sure.
You had Connor Williams at center who retired at the bye because things were not going.
Things are not going good. Yeah.
You eventually got Abe Lucas back, and that was good. And Abe's been playing solid, and he's been out for a year, so it's it's going to take some time anyway. But then you had the revolving door. I mean, your third-round pick, Christian Haynes, I bring him up because they did spend some capital on him.
Sure.
On the line, I should say. But Haynes, is not even on the depth chart at the moment. I mean, he is, but he's not seeing the field. You're going with, your 6th and 7th round picks. And
an offensive line is definitely
undrafted guys in.
An offensive line is definitely something that Seahawks need to invest in.
Now, John notoriously doesn't. He thinks that guards are overrated, overpaid.
Obviously. It seems what happened.
And in the past, they've invested. Remember,
Geno's been running for his life the whole year.
Exactly, and that's the thing. They have invested in the past. 2022 draft, Charles Cross was your first-round pick. Abe Lucas was your third-round pick. But, gosh, sign somebody this offseason.
Right.
It doesn't have to be like a huge free agent splash, but just give us somebody with experience and that is going to give you a little more protection for Geno, because we're going to talk Geno next week.
Right.
And I think 2025 is really make or break about what they do at that position. We'll go in depth in that next week, but it starts with the line.
It starts with the line, and and we'll talk about this on a future episode of the podcast. So it starts with the line, and also because of the line and the situation of what it is, it may kind of depend on the play calling. We talk about Ryan Grubb coming from a essentially pass first offense from UW, and we kind of saw a lot of pass first principles because maybe the Seahawks had struggles running because of the offensive line, maybe.
Yeah.
That being said, Zach Charbonnet was a great pick a couple years ago, and definitely K9's health will be a subject of topic going forward. But I think the health of the line and the condition of the line is why I think a lot of the play calls that I have maligned all year. Why aren't we running the ball more?
To your point.
Yeah, I think that'll balance things out going forward.
I had a great friend that's a big time college coach once tell me. He said, Niko, you obviously know what you're talking about. And for any media person, especially that's like a beat writer or covering a Seahawks team or whatever your deal is, you know enough. You know a lot. But he said that anybody that's not in those meeting rooms, anybody that's not watching the film with the team, even if you played in the past sometimes, although that's a little bit of a gray area because those guys know more than even a lot of reporters. But my point is this. He said, the people talking football and talking what a team should do with the people that are in those meeting rooms watching the film in the team's offices is as opposed to you or I talking about, it's like chess to checkers.
Yeah.
And that resonated with me from the standpoint because you saw, pertaining to this situation, you saw a lot of people saying run the ball more. And we were saying that.
I was yelling that.
But when you're in that film room, maybe they're saying, oh God, there's no way we can run the ball with this line. Or they're saying, now, I don't think that's entirely the case. I think there was a lot of situations where the Hawks got down early and Grubb just had to pass based on the script and maybe passed a little too much.
Sure.
So I don't think there's any denying that. But I think the point is this Seahawks team was in a unique position with injuries and a patchwork offensive line that, I think Geno Smith masked a lot of that. Now, you can talk about a lot of the turnover issues because he's thrown some picks that were very much head-scratcher interceptions.
Yeah.
Where you see what he sees, but you're like, well, why'd you put it there? Again, I'm not an NFL quarterback, but there was a lot going on with this team that, again, talking to the optimism, I think if they can clean it up, which is a big if.
This team has a lot of cleaning to do.
Yeah, and you're talking about a team that is the front runner in the West if they do what they have to do.
And also, I think you have to win the games at home.
Well, you can't. Mike Macdonald's been very upset about that.
You really, if this is probably, and I can't think of an NFL team with a bigger home field advantage, like maybe Kansas City, then
6-1 on the road though.
6-1 on the road. What does that say? That's so. Maybe it's a scheduling. We look at who they played, but
I actually asked Coach that, and he said it's kind of like. he said it's a good question. He had to think about it. He's like, I think it's just the guys like banding together, us against the world kind of thing.
Band
But
together
also,
at
you
home.
right, like when it's suddenly you against the world when like the Packers take over Lumen Field or the Bills take over Lumen Field.
Oh my gosh! But those fan bases also, and this is not a but this is, I mean, it's the fact that they lost those games. But we saw how those fans just took over the stadium, and it's like, let's go Pack chants in Seattle. Given the history, it's ridiculous. You know.
Yeah.
We know Buffalo fans travel well, but they traveled way too well for that game. And you know, beyond that, I mean, they lost the game for many other reasons outside Buffalo being a much better team than them, obviously. But that being said, this is also a time where the Seahawks can either get really bad. We've seen teams in their sophomore year just take a complete nosedive, you know, at the New York Giants. I'm just saying, a complete nosedive for any number of reasons. But I really truly feel like this team, at least on the defensive side, can definitely grow in the future.
Yeah,
I wouldn't even be surprised if they win 11 games next year.
I was just actually really thinking that in my head. I think if you want to break the 2024 ending, transitioning into 2025 into 3 keys for me, it would be keep the defense rolling the way we've seen since November.
Yeah.
My God, figure out that offensive line.
Yeah.
And you got to start winning games at home.
Right.
I understand they did it in September, but that was crushing. And the players were saying stuff too. And there's a whole other element there. Tickets are expensive. If you're a fan that buys season tickets, and it's like, you know, you spent, you know, hundreds and thousands of, okay, let's be honest, thousands of dollars, and you know, you can't make the Green Bay game. Well, you may as well recoup a few $100 of that, depending on how many tickets you have, right?
Right.
You know, so it's like, I get it. I do. I understand people buy those tickets, but at the same time, those fans will be compelled to sell those tickets if you're, you know, playing better at home, if you are, you know, not getting run off the field at home by Green Bay and
Is there a draw for the fans? I mean, I don't want to say lack of interest, but like, who are the fans coming to see, specifically the Seahawks, right?
Yeah.
And I think during the Pete Carroll years, it was Pete Carroll and Russ, right? You know, do you think the fans are like, and I'm talking about why so many opposing teams have their fan bases have come in, you know, think about the Seahawks team nationally, right? Who's the big draw? DK?
I think so. That would be the first thing off my head.
Right.
Lesser extent, Gino. Big Cat's starting to create that aura about him.
Yeah.
And I think some of that too comes down to, you know, the Bills. When we were talking with Sal Capaccio back in October, the Bills sideline reporter, and he was saying, like, you know, Buffalo hadn't played here since 2016, so there's a lot of Bills fans.
There's a lot of Bills fans. Yeah.
And in 2016 they were not good. Now they are.
Yeah.
I mean, they were still you know, what they were for the 15, 20 years prior to that.
Sure.
Not 20, but 15.
They were just
and so, you know, so a lot of those fans earmark, oh, this is a rare trip for us. We're going to do the Seattle or the LA Rams trip, or whatever it might be. And so, you know, I think part of it was that. But yeah, those are the 3 things you got to start. You've got to make Lumen Field like
be
that
a scary place to
10
be.
years ago.
Exactly.
The aura felt like it was gone at times.
Yeah.
And we got that reminder when Kobe Bryant set off an earthquake there.
Yeah.
That's what it can be.
With the pose and everything.
You got to protect it.
You got to protect it. I mean, you got to bring back the death zone also. You know.
Right.
Yeah, but it has to be better though.
And I think that this thing it's circling in for a landing. Will we see that landing in 25? I hope so.
Hope so too.
And what does getting a landing mean? Well, that would mean like getting back to the promised land, a Super Bowl, all that. But in the immediate term, it just means getting back to the playoffs, because now you will have not made it for 2 straight seasons, and you got to get there in 25.
And this conference is only going to be more competitive. I've talked a lot about the Cardinals and how I think they're going to be really good next year.
Oh, NFC is loaded.
The NFC is loaded. The Rams are also very good, and the Niners are not just going to fall over
10 wins.
again next year.
If you get 10 wins and you're short of the playoffs,
that's tough.
There's certain years you see, you know, 8 and 9 teams, or in the old 16-game schedule, 7 and 9 teams.
You see 6 and 10 teams make the playoffs sometimes.
And
it's brutal.
And now you're going 10 and 7 potentially. You got to beat the Rams first, and you wouldn't make the playoffs. I mean, that speaks to the larger picture in the NFC.
Right.
You know, so
the NFC is actually a stat conference.
So C+, B-.
Yeah.
I mean, C+ is fair.
A C+, but it's like
that's like you're like the chairperson looking at my B-, but no, it's a C+.
It's a C+, but it's like a 75.
Yeah, 70. Like I would give,
because I just knocked
78.
I just
is
knocked.
That a B+?
No, that's a higher C+.
I'm gonna ask.
A B- is like a 81.
I'm gonna Google this now because I forgot.
You know, This is why I should have taken Niko's class, or I shouldn't have taken Niko's class. I did.
A B- is an 80 to 82.
Yeah.
So for the sake of my point, yeah, you're probably C+, but I'll call it an 80. I'll give him an 80.
I think this team has great pieces.
We're talking way too much about numbers.
I think it needs to. I just think it needs to cook some more. But also, every other team in the division is cooking.
The cake
as
is
well.
still baking.
The cake is still baking. It's a little raw. If you watch,
You don't want to pull it out yet?
If you watch the Great British Bake Off,
No, but
Paul Hollywood would be like, it's raw on the inside. You know, it's raw. Just cook it a little bit longer. Let it cook.
I think it'll be good.
We'll see how the offseason goes.
Yeah.
I want it to be good.
Signings, draft.
Draft. There's
You get
not a lot.
You get a second-round pick back, which is cool.
There's not a lot to do as far as skill positions. You know, the cornerbacks are set, receivers are more or less
there's
set.
big decisions like Tyler Lockett.
Tyler Lockett decision. I mean, Tyler Lockett's he's not going anywhere.
Well, big contract hit though. Big, cap hit.
It's Tyler Lockett.
I know.
You know what I mean?
Knowing Tyler Lockett, I would see him trying to restructure something.
But that being said, we saw JSN kind of take in that Tyler Lockett-esque role. You know,
JSN was the guy.
He's wide receiver 1
right now. Yeah,
and I think you'll hear a lot of people that will say DK Metcalf ?
Everybody kept dangling him at the trade deadline. I never thought they were going to move him.
They won't move him during the season.
No. So that's here's the thing, and I want to point this out as we wrap things up here. For any of you, thank you so much for watching all season, but we're not ending with the season, okay?
No, we have a lot more to talk about.
That's just it. As you've heard Najee and I talk about, there's the Geno question. What about Tyler Lockett? What do you target in the draft? What do you target in free agency? Who's going to be available? There's a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to this team, when it comes to this offseason, which if last season was pretty darn pivotal as you're making that transition from Carroll to Macdonald, well, this one's pretty crucial because now it's Macdonald's, as we talked about, got his stuff in and has to make that next step. So how do they do that?
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So next week's episode will be the Geno question. He wants an extension. Should the Hawks give it to him? He's 34. He's got one more year left on his deal. I don't know. We'll talk about it. So, Najee, it's fun breaking down the games each week.
Yep.
And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about the Rams hopefully win if there's something notable
if
to
it
talk
goes
about.
well, hopefully.
And but either way, next week it's all about Geno, and in the weeks to come, we'll be talking more Hawks content, what this team needs to do to get back to the postseason and end what will by then be a 2-season drought. But thanks for listening to our breakdowns all year, but I promise you we're just getting started. This is the KOMO Sports End Zone. We love bringing this to you, and thanks for all the comments throughout the season. We appreciate that. We read them, and shout out to the Arizona Cardinal fans. Shout out to Najee Moye. But Najee, we're just getting started, my friend.
We're only getting started, yeah.
Hey, everybody, happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And hopefully by the time we're launching 2026, we're talking about there it is. We're talking about Najee wearing that hat because the Hawks are deep in the playoffs. What do you say?
I can feel it. I can feel it coming.
I like it.
I'm
going to let this pad for like 1 second just so I can see you in that Seahawks hat.
It's good, no?
I love it. Go Hawks.
This is how Toucan Sam feels all the time.
On that note, good night, everybody.
Good night.